All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money. Excited to be with you as always. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Hey, I love the Christmas tree in the
Good. Thank you.
background, David. I love
Yeah,
that.
I decided to move out of the office. So this is the Christmas tree right here.
I think it is the right
Yeah.
thing to do. I'm
Why
so
not?
excited. It looks great. It looks great. You guys did a
Uh,
great job.
and by the way, I am not a religious guy. I don't do religion. So, but I respect the traditions and everything else. So I decided to do it.
Love,
Anyway, very,
love
very
it.
excited to be with you guys. And we have an interesting topic for you today. So I know last week Elizabeth wasn't here, was out of town, and she was busy with other stuff. So today we decided we're so excited to be talking. What are we going to be covering today, Elizabeth?
Okay, so let me share this first because what we are seeing is a massive departure. So let me share before I get really, really excited about this and share what's going on. So we're seeing this lovely document right here. So this is the National Security Strategy that just came out of the White House like a week ago.
Yeah.
And it outlines a massive departure from what the US's strategy has been
Yeah.
basically since World War II. And it is changing some really massive things. Now, granted, there is
Mhm.
obviously the conversation about whether it's going to actually, the US is actually going to do, the administration is going to do what it says in this document. But
Yeah.
this is even a massive rhetoric change. And we were talking about this before we got on, that it talks about NATO, it talks about China, it talks about about Europe, it talks about
Yeah.
Russia and Ukraine and that whole situation. And so it's massive, massive departures, but there's something even bigger than all of that it talks about. And it talks about the fact that this document says that the
Yeah.
United States is no longer going to be policing the world. Like the United States is no longer going to be the forever war country and the country that is bossing everybody else around, and
Yeah.
is more going to be a regional hegemon. So I'm interested to dive into that because that's crazy. It
Yeah.
also talks about no longer spreading democracy, which, as we know, is the reason that we went into the Middle East, is to spread democracy and share democracy. So, David, I think we got our work cut out for us today.
Well, I had a chance to read this particular strategy. As a matter of fact, there will be specific pages I'm going to refer to as we move forward into this conversation. But,
Yes, me too.
yeah, but the question that comes to mind right off the bat is, are you going to trust what the White House is saying?
No. And okay, so let's dive into that for a
So,
second, because no, for sure not. This document is really interesting. And David, can I start by sharing
sure.
a snippet that I thought was particularly interesting? Okay,
Yeah.
so this is on page 1. I mean, they don't even they just jump right into this.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me read this. So after the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interest of our country.
Hmm.
Okay, that's interesting to have admitted. Yet the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. Our elites badly miscalculated America's willingness to shoulder forever global burdens, to which the American people saw no connection to the national interest.
Interest.
They overestimated America's ability to fund simultaneously a massive welfare regulatory administrative state alongside a massive military, diplomatic, intelligence, and foreign aid complex.
Yeah.
They placed hugely misguided and destructive bets on globalism and so-called free trade that hollowed out the very middle class and industrial base on which American economics and military preeminence depended.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think of this?
Well, the wording of it.
Wow, right?
It's not a laughing matter. It's the idea of this is why sort of we want our community to really read between the lines. You don't fall for this kind of flowery wording and speeches and so forth. Yeah, of course, the strategy will have to be presented and sort of advocated for in a way that will sort of highlight this. Wow, this is a major departure from what the U.S. have. But how many, if you are to move away from the so-called the spread of democracy, what are you going to replace it with? You are already replacing it with something like what we just saw this morning, what happened in Venezuela. When you start taking over the oil tankers of sovereign nations, then what is that? Are you moving to so-called the piracy? So you are basically just
Did you say piracy?
Yeah, because
that's funny, but yeah, I mean that's it's not inaccurate.
No, as a matter of fact, by the way, the community, I'm going to be detailing this particular topic tomorrow on the other channel. So because it's worth addressing, because when you read what you just shared with us here about the U.S. overestimated America's ability to fund whatever. Well, if we're funding conflict, have been funding conflicts from overseas for over 4 or 5 decades, what makes us think that all of a sudden we're going to stop today? So just because the national strategy came out from the White House sort of advocating for this. As a matter of fact, when I looked at that strategy, the first one of the first the first paragraph in which the narrative goes as to start, and I quote here, this is what Donald Trump is saying: starting my first day in office, we restored the sovereign borders of the United States and deployed U.S. military to stop the invasion of our country. I mean, come on.
Right.
When you talk also about we have begun strengthening our military with over $1 trillion in investments. Well, how are you going to invest that one when you have to create conflict? So this is my point. And of course, lying about the historical commitments from NATO, since we are talking about NATO, that now they're going to be spending 5% of their defense, which is nothing but a sort of hyperbole, no more, no less, because certain member countries in NATO cannot afford a 5% increase in their defense budget.
Well, and I think, do you want to dive into NATO? But
let's do that.
I do want to address what you're saying, though, because it's really, really important. So the United States having this document come out. So first of all, my personal take on this is that the Trump administration has been under an enormous amount of hot water lately for good reason. The tariffs more or less failed. They're being contested all over the place. People are starting to realize that it turns out that most of that tariff money is actually their money and not, in fact, it is not, in fact, China and other countries that are primarily eating the tariffs. It's primarily Americans, right? So people are starting to realize that. They're starting to get really, I mean, we are in a massive debt crisis in a whole bunch of ways here in the United States.
Yeah.
And to people's credit, they're sort of waking up about it. Now, it's pushing people into this area of like massive discomfort, right? People are waking up because all of a sudden they're very uncomfortable. They can't afford the things that they used to. And so that's how people are starting to wake up. But we have sort of like a perfect storm of like, Doge didn't work. It didn't do much of anything. I know that Elon Musk came out and he was like, well, it's moderately successple. No, bro, it was not. It was not successful at all. We're still waiting on our, what was it, $5,000 Doge checks? Everybody's still waiting on that, right? So that was unsuccessful, and that was part of the Trump administration. We have the Epstein stuff that came out with Trump. We have in my opinion, I was like, who's trying to take Trump out that all of a sudden this stuff is being like leaked to the press, or the press is finding it magically, right? But and then we have the tariffs that have absolutely failed. So Trump is in a lot of really hot water. And so I don't know if he fired his last PR team or what, but this document talks about a lot of the things that Americans are actually asking for, right? It's talking about elites. It's talking about people don't want forever wars anymore. They don't want forever conflicts anymore. And so it's like addressing, because David, do you think that if the Trump administration came to the American people and was like, well, guys, we already gave Ukraine billions of dollars, but we need some more money for Ukraine, what do you think people would say?
Yeah, they're not gonna like that, of course. Well, because the majority of Americans do not know. We already spent about over $300 billion already. $300 billion. 50, to my knowledge, 58 billion out of that have circulated back to members of Congress. I mean, think about it. Just think about it. $58 billion, to my knowledge. I mean, and even if you say, oh, all this money which coming out of our taxes, by the way, you know, nothing has been, what has been achieved in Ukraine? Ukraine now is so devastated to the point that,
it's awful.
It's kind of, well, they brought it on their own. At the same time, we're asking, you know, how much can we fund with this when Americans are struggling, you know? If you ask an average American about this national strategy, they're not going to know because they don't care for that kind of stuff. What they care about is whether they can afford to buy the basic necessities, you know, of daily life. This is exactly where the issue is. And that is why this issue of NATO, which, will it be nice if Trump would have said, you know what, we're done with this NATO. But Trump can't. I'm here to tell you, no American president can withdraw from NATO. I'm telling you this based on facts. You know, American president has no power whatsoever. You are not going to, because the leaders of today are different from what we had back then. You remember in 1966, you know, who was the head of France, the president of France at that time? It was none other than Charles de Gaulle. General de Gaulle. General de Gaulle was the only one who was able to pull France out of NATO completely. Why? Because he said, I don't want the Americans to dominate everything. You know, can you see any leader right now in NATO saying something like that? Look how weak the European leaders are. Look how we are treating Europe right now. I mean, you look at Europe in two options: either becoming a colony of the United States or face death, economically speaking.
Well, let's say a little bit more about that, because you're absolutely right. There are no legal proceedings to pull out of NATO. The United States cannot pull out of NATO. But what they are asking, or what the Trump administration is asking for, is an economic slowdown or an economic pull out of NATO. To what extent can NATO actually exist if the US pulls out economically? It pulls out their financial contribution, because the United States gives the majority,
over 70%,
right?
Over 70% of the budget.
So even if they were to contribute 5%, for example, let's say the United States keeps pulling out and pulling out and pulling out and pulling out. Can NATO continue to function solely funded by Europe?
No, it won't. And that's an interesting question, because the last summit of the NATO summit, one of the particular documents came out as far as where the agreement was that, most countries will contribute about 5%. You know? And again, you go and you ask yourself, can a country like Cyprus, can a country like Greece, can a country like whatever contribute 5%? They can't.
No, they
can't. They knew at that time during that summit, because what Trump's gonna, because nobody wants to deal with Trump anyway. The Europeans know this, but they have no other alternative. They have no other option. It's because they're dealing with a bully and they don't know how to handle him, for that matter. So what NATO ended up saying, we were gonna increase the defense budget by 5% of every country, but that's just on the paper. On the paper. Germany is not going to 5%. Germany is going to about 2.6%. That's about it. So Germans have been riding on the American funding for all these years. That's why the economy in Germany back then, we go into the Russia-Ukraine conflicts, it was great. Why? Because the Germans were using their own money to build their own infrastructure while leaving the defense to the Americans, our tax dollars. And this is what I'm saying. This issue of NATO, or the US is going to divorce from NATO. No, no, there's nothing but hypes. It's not going to happen because Europeans have been calling, oh, we're going to have to build our own security defense alliance. We can't do it either. I used to hear it I've been hearing it since I was a kid. Nothing happened. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
So what you are seeing now is that we have like a parallel to two issues on two separate tracks. You have now this NATO, but you have also, like what you mentioned earlier, the economic aspect. Look how much we are squeezing the Europeans economically speaking.
Yes. So this is super fascinating to me because this is sort of and we'll talk about China, we'll talk about some of the other things in a bit, but I want to talk about the United States and Russia. Okay. So is there really, like, during the Cold War, there was an obvious, the Russians are the enemies. And here's why the Russians are the enemies. We have to beat them in all these ways. We have to beat them in the space race. We have to beat them. We have to beat them, in all of these ways. Okay. Right now, if you are an American, if you are not a European, you're not a Ukrainian, what is America's actual stake in the Ukraine-Russia conflict? And I mean, I have my own opinions on the answer to this, but I want to pose this as a question to you guys so that you can sort of think your way through the answer. And David, I obviously want your answer on this, but what interest or what concern do does the United States and do American people have with Russia? Is the United States afraid that Russia is going to start a second Cold War? Is there any real concern for the United States if it's just focusing on itself from Russia anymore? That's it's a legitimate question, and I want to see your responses in the chat box also, guys. But David, what do you think?
Well, actually, the issue of Russia or China, for that matter, because those are the only two countries now that are under the sort of on the sides of both NATO and the US. Why? Because we, when I say we, I'm referring to the government, US government, find it sort of convenient to have either a real or a perceived enemy, as long as we keep saying all the time. So for now, we've been playing the Russian enemy card, okay? Once the Ukraine-Russia conflict ends at some point, we're going to turn our attentions to the Chinese. We already are turning it. You look at the white paper came out of NATO summit, the last one, in which it's clearly, specifically stated, and I'm paraphrasing here, that we are concerned about China representing an existential threat to NATO. I mean, just think about a statement like that. Look where China is, look where NATO is, and how is China's going to become an existential threat? So my point in this is just we wanted to always keep the narrative alive regarding the issue of real or perceived enemy. So to average Americans, it's like, I have nothing against the Russians, but will I even care? They are over there, we are over here. But again, the average person here is concerned more about the economic conditions of his own well-being rather than worrying about other countries. And what makes it even worse is some now are asking the questions, Americans, that is, average people, asking the questions, how come our tax dollars being spent overseas but not here in America?
Yes, that is the fundamental question. And to me, this document actually speaks to the fact that we do have some power. And that's why I brought this up, is because this document is more or less, like I said earlier, and I think you probably agree with this. I'm not speaking for you, but I think you probably agree that not everything in this document is going to happen. Okay.
No, I won't. No, I won't.
Surprise, surprise. Okay. But this document is headed towards more of an accurate narrative, not completely, obviously, but more of an accurate narrative. So the reality is that it's not that Americans are unsympathetic to the plight of Ukraine, because Ukraine, their people have been decimated. Their country has been decimated. It is sad. It is awful. I mean, more or less, what is it, like 1 million young men between Russia and Ukraine have basically been killed. I mean, that's horrific loss of life.
Yeah.
Over what? Over what exactly? And so I think there's a huge question that's been sitting for a long time as to what this was about. If it wasn't about democracy,
Yeah.
what was this actually about? If this wasn't, because in this document, I think they also address, or this, and I think other things are starting to come out right now, where the Trump administration is saying, hey, Ukraine is not joining NATO, number one, and number two, Ukraine is no more expansion of NATO. Like, NATO cannot continue to expand, which is basically what Russia has been saying all along.
Yeah.
So whereas the Biden administration was like, no, this is about democracy. What else did he say it was about? Just democracy, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
I know. It just makes you just wonder how the whole idea of because we created the problem, and we're not going to be repeating ourselves. We talked about this so many times, for how long the problem has been created. Sort of, it was initiated back in 2006, 2007, the ball started rolling. 2014, that's where we intervened physically. When I say physically, I'm referring to the $5 million allocated from the State Department towards that end, when Victoria Nuland was doing what she was doing, the evil stuff she was doing to that. So the whole idea is because we wanted to maintain that narrative, the Russians are bad. Well, we're the one encroaching on their neighborhood, coming closer to Russia's doorsteps. What do we expect? The Russians are going to welcome us with open arms? No, they're not going to like that. And the same argument now is being made about the Far East in Asia, which is another topic for another day. What's important now to understand is that this stance regarding NATO, and by the way, let me just, and I speak for myself, let me just make it clear, there will be no divorce between the US and NATO. Let me just put this
is there a NATO without the United States?
That's the point. They won't be able to defend themselves.
Would they survive?
No, they can't. They can't. I mean, the conflict now between Russia and Ukraine really exposed the weaknesses of NATO. When it comes down to the hardware, we're talking about military hardware. I mean, I'm not even going to get involved in talking about the leaked classified information regarding what the Chinese have regarding the naval assets. Even the US now is so concerned. So that gives you an idea right there. But where the big picture into all this is how much we are like planning this particular trajectory for Europe, to leave it with no other options but to just run to us. That's why I said the term earlier. It's almost, I feel like, what Trump is saying to Europe. You only have two options: either become a colony, US colony, or face death, economically speaking. Well, we're already seeing what Germany's economy is. You're already seeing what France is doing. At the same time, you look at what Macron just did with his trip to China. Why do you think Macron went to China? And by the way, when he returned back, within 48 hours, he stabbed China in the back by stating he will impose tariffs on Chinese goods. I mean, just think about it. But the whole idea of this, and I wanted to lead into our second part of this conversation here.
Actually, before you do you want to hear? So JD Vance, actually, let me add
that's another one.
Stage here. So when he was at the Munich Security Conference, he said some kind of interesting stuff that goes, like, David, directly along with what you just said. So do you want to listen in for a second?
Yeah, that's when he lamented the Europeans about freedom of speech, right?
Okay.
Wow.
Well,
but while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine. And we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them.
Okay, so this whole thing is full of a bunch of crazy stuff, but David, what do you think?
Oh, it just hypes, no more, no less. I mean, if he's talking about this freedom of whatever, how come we have the same problems here in America? I mean, you look at now, just recently I was made aware of Mr. Calloway. You know who George Calloway is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been detained in Britain. So now he's not in Britain anymore. He's self-exiled. I mean, you're talking about a former MP.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's speaking truth to power. So where is this freedom of? Yeah. Well, he's a pragmatic individual.
Yeah.
He's a pragmatic individual. So when you see what's going on even here, you look at just, well, without going into the nitty-gritty of how the social media here sometimes have to silence you because you're speaking the truth, that becomes what J.D. Vance is saying. It's basically just an echo chamber, no more. Europeans have no other alternative except to stand on their own feet. The question is whether they have that ability to do so. I believe part of the problem for Europe is the European Union itself. If the European Union disintegrates, okay, and you let countries pursue their own policies, irrespective of what Brussels, because you have the European Union, Brussels controls the policies. With some countries, for example, you take the example of Hungary. Hungary do not want the flood of immigrants.
Right.
It's their country. They can decide whatever. Other countries, which like, for example, Poland, decided to maintain its own currency. More power to them. That's what they want.
Absolutely.
If you take other countries, each one of them has its own. So European Union, in my opinion, is part of the problem. If the European Union disintegrates, you might see Europe surviving, because now you're going to have every country pursuing its own strategic interest.
Right.
That's the way I see it. It's unlikely that will happen. And by the way, do you know that it was George Calloway that has pushed for the UK exit from the EU? And now the British are thanking him for that. And yet, look at the way they are treating him. What a shame. What a shame on that government. And the UK is going down anyway, if you look at the poverty level and the economic conditions across Europe, for that matter. So this is where I see the problem. The problem now is moving from not just talking about NATO, getting into the economic sphere of influence. And one reason we always kept an eye on that. We never wanted Europeans to get closer to Russia because of the access to energy.
Yep.
That's what's at the heart of it, why we are doing all what we're doing. Even in this national strategy, there is a mention there about access to energy that Trump is talking about. Do you think what's going on in Venezuela happens in a vacuum? The seizure of a tanker happens in a vacuum? No. All this is directed by the oil companies, the main players here in the US that have a major influence on a foreign policy, and that's what dictating the term to the Trump administration to embark on.
So it's interesting that you're talking about what you're saying. So what this meant to me when I listened to this entire JD Vance speech is, this was in February of this year. Europe should have been preparing, because this was the first thing. This is one of the first things that basically were coming out of the United States being like, hey, we're not really interested in supporting you anymore. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it is very clear. It is a very clear statement of like, hey, we're going two different directions. You guys are not democratic enough for us anymore, which is political speak for we're not interested in supporting you anymore.
Yeah.
And that was in February. And David, how many things have you seen since February where the United States more or less has been towards Europe, towards the European Union, to basically be like, okay, well, we're not really in this with you anymore? How many things have you seen?
Yeah, well, it's a lot. It's the idea of, but remember that the big thing about American policy towards, or if you call it the transatlantic relations, is that when you have the next president, he or she will reverse everything.
Right.
This is one thing where I see, yeah, what the Europeans have embarked on, even during the years of COVID. You remember what they did and all that stuff, which is that's a different topic altogether. But you think about what they have done to the European citizens, to the average citizens. And we do have, by the way, we do have a lot of viewers from Europe watching our channels here. So the idea that Europeans also have to take matters into their own hands. But
they do.
Well, it's no different than what we have here. I mean, do you see any Americans taking any stand whatsoever?
Well, so I am and I'm not. So, and I want to address something that you were talking about earlier, David, is you were talking about more or less the fact that the EU cannot, the countries cannot more or less manage some of their own needs. Like, some of them are like, Poland just got an exemption from having to take immigrants because that's a hard stand that Poland has had. And so, and Poland kept the zloty, for example. They did not take on the euro. But we have watched countries like Greece, for example, who have not benefited by taking on the euro. Their economies couldn't handle it. They're not the same size economy, and they're not run the same way that Germany is, for example. But even Germany is struggling. So right now, all of the big countries, you're absolutely right, all of them are really struggling with the fact that they cannot manage their own economies. They can't manage their own policies. They're stuck under an umbrella when they are wildly different sized economies, and they have very different needs. They have very different populations and very different needs. But I do think, I think that Brexit, and I'd maybe like to do like an entire show on whether Brexit was actually beneficial for the UK or not, because the UK is not exactly in a great place right now. So I'd like, if you guys are interested in doing sort of an economic deep dive into what the consequences of Brexit versus whether they had stayed in the EU are, I think that would be an interesting topic, David.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect to this, it has to do also with what's coming up next year for the G7 summit, which is going to be in I think in Evian, in France. That's what it's going to be. But at the same time, the Europeans also, or this G7 summit, which has the so-called the most advanced economies in the world, Japan, Canada, US, UK, France, Germany, I think, they're going to be coming to this summit with the notion that their global GDP now is less in comparison to what, for example, BRICS is outputting out there.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at BRICS GDP, global GDP output, it's about 35%. When you look at the G7, it's about 27 to 28%. And that gives you an idea as to where the trajectory is headed. Could it be that the US also is pushing into that direction, realizing its economy, it's very, very struggling. And the way to understand this is when you look at, for example, if you go back to, since you have the screen on, can you take it to, take it to page 22.
Okay.
Page 22, third paragraph, where it starts with China state-led. If you can put that on the screen. Yeah, 22, go down. Yeah, right. Page 22.
Okay, here's page 22.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no. It's page 17.
17. No,
hold
go
on,
22.
There it is.
Read this stuff. I know what it is. Right there.
Here it is.
You can highlight that one, China. Right. Yeah. So when it says, listen to that one. China state-led and state-backed companies excel in building physical and digital infrastructure. And China has recycled perhaps $1.3 trillion in trade surpluses. So, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. My point in this, it looks like this G7, including the US, are already seeing there is no way of catching up to what's going on, given that Donald Trump's policies have backfired. I mean, despite all these tariffs and all that, here it is, China coming up with $1.3 trillion in surplus. That makes you just take a step back and wonder, what went wrong?
Well, so interestingly enough, this whole section, I guess we can transition into China, David, because this whole section is very, very interesting. It's an entire section on China. So let me go up to 17, because this goes exactly with what you're saying, David. No, wait, where was I? 20. Nope. Okay, here it is. This whole section, guys, so it's like page, I think it's like 17 to 20 something, is all about China. So David, it's really interesting because they talk about this here. China adapted to the shift in US tariff policy that began in 2017, blah, 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 especially in the world's low and middle income per capita. Okay. Where is this? Of course it talks about Trump the whole time, but just, I guess, sit with it. When President Trump first took office in 2017, China's exports to the United States stood at 4% of its GDP, but have since fallen to slightly over 2%. China continues, however, to export to the United States through other proxy countries. That is true. That is happening. Yeah. Going forward, we will rebalance America's economic relationship with China. So this right here is a very interesting departure from the rhetoric of China bad, China terrible, China evil. Listen to this freaking narrative change, David, that's happened over the last 3 months? Yeah. Since the whole tariff debacle, all of a sudden, because how long was Trump ultra anti-China for?
Yeah, for a long time. Yeah. And the idea is because the US realized that he couldn't, not the US, we're talking about Donald Trump here. Donald Trump realized he couldn't bully the Chinese, especially when it comes down to tariffs.
Clearly.
But he could do it with the Europeans. He could do it with Japan. He could do it with South Korea, but he couldn't do it with the Chinese. And that is, again, where you start to realize where this trajectory, if we are to go back to that issue of the NATO and economic relations between the US and Europe, you can see why Trump is finding it convenient to exert more pressure on Europe to sort of for the base. This is for the base here. It's for domestic consumptions. Look what I'm doing to the Europeans and so forth. But at the same time, now you have average Americans, especially now with the holidays, are wondering, some of them, are they going to be able to even buy basic gifts for their kids? Because, Christmas is a big holiday here and all that stuff, but they are realizing the prices. As a matter of fact, I found out a few days ago that Costco, the Costco, the big giant thing, they are filing a lawsuit against Donald Trump because of tariffs.
That's not surprising. That's not surprising. It is eating into every single large corporation's business. It is eating into them like crazy. And so we're not it's kind of worse than, can Americans afford Christmas presents? Because that's a big question. But we're starting to see massive defaults in some really important areas. Like I did a show that should release in the next couple of maybe like the next 2 weeks, about so there's a shadow banking system. Guys, I don't know if you know this, but there's a shadow banking system. So the majority of loans that are given out in the United States are not actually given out through banks, right? It's not the person going to, Chase Bank or whatever bank. It's not the person going to that bank and going and asking for like a car loan or a mortgage or whatever. That's not how most loans are actually given out. Most loans are actually given out through a secondary, or I guess at that point, it's like a tertiary entity. So a couple of these really big loan houses, more or less, they're operating like banks, but they are in fact not banks, and they're giving out loans to people. A couple of big ones have failed recently. So something called Tricolor has failed. And there's another one, I forget what it's called, but they're people who gave out loans, especially car loans, because car repossession rates and loan default rates are through the freaking roof. But when you're looking at the average car price here being $50,000, that's a really rough price tag for people to swallow. So we're looking at a ton of defaults right now because a lot of the American economy had been propped up by credit, right? People using credit cards, getting lines of credit, and buying everything on credit. Well, the problem with credit is then you then have to pay it back with interest. And if you didn't have enough money to buy the thing that you wanted to begin with, unless you start making more money, it's going to be very challenging to pay that off, plus ultra high interest rates the way that they've been. And so it's worse than just can I like straightforward, can I afford to buy Christmas presents or whatever that is. It's a fundamental problem that is coming to a huge head. It's not just the United States government that has a massive amount of debt. It's actually the people that have a massive amount of debt also. And both those things are coming to a head this year.
Well, the same applies to the Europeans. That's why those countries now are falling apart. You have manufacturing in Germany shutting down. You have France now. France is going through some really bad economic conditions, especially after being kicked out of the Africa, of the Sahel region, because now they don't have access to that cheap energy they once did. So it's kind of Europe is. This is one of the why I'm saying Trump is almost giving them that ultimatum. Either become a colony or die, economically speaking. So I don't know what will happen to Europe about a decade from now. I just don't see the only way I see it working out. If they dissolve this EU, the European Union, cease to exist, and allow each country to pursue its own. Yes, they still can trade among themselves, whatever. But the second most crucial aspect to them, of course, the euro will have to also be removed, because here is one issue that the Americans have with the Europeans now. Because of the changes, I'm sure you heard about what the Russians just did. I think I still have a picture. Let me share it here. I kept a picture here. Yeah, right here. This is when the Russians issued bonds in the yuan, in the yuan currency. Yeah. And the bonds were about, for 3 years, for 3.5, it will be about 6%. And for 7 years, it will be about 7.2%. My point. Well, it is. Yeah, think about it. Yeah, the bank will not even offer you that. But my point is not about that. My point is that majority of countries are now either borrowing in yuan or borrowing in the euro. They're not borrowing in the dollar. And that's one of the things the US is looking at Europe. And that's one of the, also, if the Europeans wants to really stand on their feet, the fiscal policies, the financial aspects will have also to be addressed. Till they do this, which they could start that, it's not gonna, things gonna resolve over a year or 2 or 3. It might take them a decade before they stabilize their economy, but also that's a decade that will not be lost.
Absolutely.
And the third element to all this, that Europe, given its geographical limitations, yes, the southern part of Europe have access to waters, but still, when you think Europe writ large, it is very limited. The third element has to do with access to cheap energy. They were getting that from Russia. Russia turned off the spigot. Where are they going to get that from now? That is that's why the Americans plan on this, so they can sell energy to the European 5, 6, 7 times higher the price they used to pay.
David, it's very interesting that you're bringing up energy, because if you look at the AI race, right? What is the number one issue that all countries are facing with artificial intelligence, China and the US included?
Is electricity and access to energy. Yeah,
it's access to energy, and it's perhaps why all of our electricity bills are going up. Also, but that's a major problem. In fact, it is the problem. And with shutting down, so do you remember we did a show on this a while back about Germany shutting down their nuclear power plants? Which was freaking crazy at the time. It was like, why on earth? They shut them down and then reopened their coal plants. I have I am not one of those people who is like a climate change denier. Climate, I think, is very likely changing. But what I cannot figure out is, if climate change is real, why on earth is no government taking it seriously? No governments are taking it seriously, and no corporations are taking it seriously. None of the elites are taking it seriously. None of them. Did you see for the climate summit in Brazil, they mowed down acres and acres of rainforest to build a road to get there? What a freaking joke. So nobody seems to be actually taking this seriously. I mean, I think that's addressed actually in here too, is that they're like, well, climate policies are actually bad for our interests, so we're just not going to do them. No one is taking it seriously. So either it is a huge lie, either it's a giant hoax, it's a giant lie, and it was meant to manipulate the crap out of people, or it's real, and then people just don't, the people who are in positions to do something about it just flat out aren't. I don't know if they think that it's not going to catch up. I don't know if it's a kicking the can down the road, but it's one of these two options. But they're just absolutely not paying attention at all.
Well, that's why the Europeans will, I doubt it, the current leadership in Europe, we're talking from France, UK, whatever, they are not only incompetent, but they are weak. They are weak. They can't take a stand. That is where the issue is. I mean, you still can disagree, and there is nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, you can't just be taking a beating and not fighting back. And that's exactly what the Europeans doing. Angela Merkel, when she was a German chancellor, she was able to push back against the American government, while preserving the transatlantic relations. I remember one time I was flying to Frankfurt, and in front of me was sitting none other than Alan Greenspan, because he was going to Frankfurt at the time for some financial cover. And right before you know it, by the time I did my work, whatever I was going for, came back to the US a month and a half later, the policy was set that the Europeans is going to coordinate the financial policy with the Americans regarding some future policy pertaining to that. So I was very surprised in a way that the Germans didn't push back, and not just the Germans, the French. You have now France right now. France is saying we need a security independence. You know how long France has been saying this forever. I remember for so many years they've been saying this. Nothing has changed. And they're gonna be doing the same till they really embark on action. They can talk all they want. It's in action that matters. And I don't see the Europeans have the political will and the determination to be able to say to the Americans, you know what? We're going to be dealing with this Russia-Ukraine issue. We're going to try to solve it. But at the same time, is the Europeans now that they want to keep pushing for arming Ukraine? Arming them till when? it's already devastated.
Right.
You know, that's, I don't know what you already, you know, if you see the images, I had a chance to look at some documentaries pertaining from the ground as to the massive devastations that the media is not reporting here the exact devastation Ukraine has suffered.
Yeah.
And even I got a word that Zelensky is already planning his next location after it's over. And one of the locations that came up is Israel.
Wow, that would be.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
If Zelensky went to Israel.
Yeah. So that's so
I
far
think
the word I got. So
wow,
as a matter of fact,
wow.
community about it between I didn't put Israel there, but I put the US, UK, France, I think.
I think he would be very unpopular here in the United States. I don't know that he would be, I don't know that he would be particularly well loved here.
They'll take him out here if he, given how we are sort of society, you know, because we're allowed to own guns and all that stuff, and I won't be surprised.
Oh yeah, I don't know that he would be. I don't know that he would be safe here.
Yeah, here is the. If I may just share this quickly.
Sure.
With the community, when I said, given the ongoing degradation of the Ukraine forces, in which country do you believe Zelensky is preparing to seek asylum in? So I put Israel, US, Germany, and UK. Israel came up with 48%.
Yeah.
US 21%, Germany 7%, and UK 24%. And I thank the community for really participating in this. We had about almost 1,400 votes on it, and that gives you an idea right there. It gives you an idea right there as to where things are headed. So the idea of Europeans are not capable of taking a stand. They can resolve this issue between Russia and Ukraine to their favor, economically speaking. But of course, Russia is not going to compromise on its own security principles, and the Europeans, because the US have its thumb on them, dictating the terms. Till they free, meaning the Europeans, till they free themselves from the shackles of the US, nothing's going to change.
Well, so, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because if you look at, and sorry guys, I switched the screens because I was coughing and I didn't want to cough in your ears. But
you don't take it personally.
I know. But I just wanted them to know I didn't disappear for no reason.
Yeah.
I was courteous and didn't cough in your ears. Which economies are you watching? Which countries are you watching actually take care of themselves? There are the two big ones, and they are Russia and China. And a couple of other peripheral countries, like Poland, is taking care of itself economically. And there's some other like little countries that are doing it. El Salvador, I think, is doing a really great job. But if you're looking at large countries, which ones are actually taking care of themselves? It's very few, including the United States. The United States economically has not been taking care of itself for a very long time. And you can tell that because we've been in decline. If the United States had been implementing some of the things that Donald Trump's administration is saying they're going to implement, whether they do or not is bad. But had Donald they implement, go ahead.
I was going to say Donald Trump is for Donald Trump.
Absolutely. But this sentiment around him is changing. So he had to do something that made some sense. He has been such an abject, unfortunately, failure that he had to say something that made some sense. What he said in this document, or what his administration said in this document, makes some sense. I don't know that they're going to do it. I don't think they will for the most part, but some things they don't have a choice, right? So his more moderate position on China, he had to take. There wasn't another option. The United States couldn't continue taking the very aggressive anti-China stance that he's been taking and survive. And so but these other countries, if you look at France, if you look at Germany, if you look at a lot of Europe, they're also not taking care of themselves, not only economically, but socially. You have a lot of crime, you have a lot of terrorism, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in these European countries, and they need to take care of themselves better.
And And you might want to add drugs to that. Now it's been just reported that Europe now is the hub for drugs, for cocaine.
And that's awful. I mean, these countries are beautiful. They're beautiful, extraordinary countries with these deep, rich cultures and good people. And yet they're falling apart in similar ways to the United States. The United States is falling apart in a lot of really big ways, and ways that this little document isn't going to fix. I mean, there's serious problems in pretty much every area of the United States and all of these other Western countries.
Well, that tells you right there, sort of the Western hegemony is coming to its end. The journey that's been for so many decades, it's coming to an end. So we are, and I wrote on this extensively, we are on our last leg of the trip. This hegemonic trip. So
it's interesting because this document talks a lot about the elites.
Yeah.
And I think that anger is appropriately starting to be credited to the elites, right? Like they tried to make people think that it was other people, right? Like just, for various, I'm not going to say it on YouTube, but it's like various different things that they had us pitted against each other, right? Versus left, this culture versus this culture, that, skin color, whatever the issues were. When the real issue has always been socioeconomic, and it has always been the elite versus literally the rest of us. And it's interesting that people are starting to realize that, and they're starting to, like, this document addresses it. This document says this is the elite's fault.
Yeah. What they've been in
I mean, Donald Trump is an elite, by the way. I mean, it's not like he's not like separate from that. But it blames the elites for this, which is a huge departure from the well, they hate our democracy. Those people from Afghanistan and Iraq, they hate our democracy, and that's why things are bad. No, dude, things are bad because the elites gutted our country. Not just us, but the Europeans too.
That is indeed. All right, well, let's see if we have any question from anybody in the community. By the way, just for the community, tomorrow, as I said, I will be talking about Venezuela. I'm going to put the link for you in the chat box, so if you have time to join me tomorrow. Which, by the way, it's an act that the U.S. embarked on that is really violating international law. There are those who are saying, oh, the U.S. is acting within its legal. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because they cannot do it that way. Let's just put it that way, legally speaking. But
well, I mean, there's a whole thing in this document about how we're not going to police democracy around the world anymore.
As we said,
Venezuela that.
As we said at the beginning, are they switching it for piracy?
That's so funny. That's so funny.
In a certain thing, so
American pirates.
Yeah, well, it's.
Yeah. Well, David, there's always a lag between, we need to ask people for questions like earlier on
ahead of time,
because there's always like a lag. Yeah. And so we say it, and then like 20, 30 seconds later, you guys hear it. So we're just sitting here like, oh man.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Well, next time when we do live, guys, next week, just prepare questions. So
yes, that sounds good. And David is next week is not the week of Christmas, right?
No, the following week.
Guys, it's the week after, I think. Yeah. Okay, next week is not the week of Christmas. Yeah. It's the week after. That's the week of Christmas.
And Christmas is gonna fall on Thursday, so we're not gonna be doing.
Ayo, we got a question.
Okay. Question, Doc. The background is confusing. I will be guest Elizabeth would have a Christmas tree behind her as background.
I do have a Christmas tree. It's just not in the
other side. In the other side, yes.
But if you guys want, I can take a picture of my Christmas tree. I love Christmas. It's one of my favorite times of the year, and I love the spirit of giving and family and warmth and love that comes with it. So I do have one though, Matt. It's just not behind me.
Yeah. All right. That answers your question, Matt. All right. Let's see if there is any other question. If not, we're going to sign off. And we'll next week we'll address some other key topics. And by the way, we need to do the AI because we did promise the community at some point.
The AI thing is really interesting because it is heating up. It's heating up, and there's some like really major problems that are coming up as it's heating up. So I'm very interested to do that. And I'm very curious. I'm very curious to see how this turns out because right now everybody's like hugely into this AI. I did a show on the AI bubble that I will release on Saturday. So keep your eyes open. We haven't been on for a couple of weeks. So YouTube is not going to show you our content. You must go look for it, unfortunately. But go look for it. It'll be out on Saturday.
Well, good. So, well, if we don't have any questions, we're going to sign off. We look forward to, thank you for being here, by the way. And make sure, please, to hit the like button and subscribe if this is your first time here. And if it is, welcome to our community. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.